Now, Jake, you have an election. You had an election.
Indeed.
It's all done and dusted.
It is.
Clive Palmer is now your premier. He would like to be known.
He wasn't running.
He would like to be known as the Sultan, from what I
Yes.
understand.
Yep. The Sultan of Swing.
The Sultan of Mining. Anyway,
Maybe.
yeah.
Maybe.
At least I did something. Okay, so he didn't. His party didn't fare very well.
His party in the last few elections that he has, that his party has stood for, has not really had any intention of electing any members, which is, quite disingenuous. But essentially, and this is probably arguable. This is probably an arguable point. But it seems that the sole purpose of Palmer for the last couple of elections, or for Unite Australia Party, which is the name of his party, was to vote mine, essentially to preference mine votes for the Liberal National Party. Right. And that was widely acknowledged. It was widely talked about following the last federal election and the preference mining that went on there with an enormous number of candidates that will run pretty well right across the country, and the enormous amount of money that was spent on the election by the United Australia Party.
More than any other candidate, according to the news I was reading.
With exactly zero elected. So there was this claim, and I messaged Greg throughout the week because I'd received a series of text messages on a, quote, death tax that the Labor Party was supposedly, if you believe Palmer or mineralogy, who could that be?
I do.
But look, if you could believe him, those text messages were sent out to pretty well every Queenslander with a phone number, with a mobile phone number, about Labor supposedly bringing in a death tax, and there was 2 text messages, which is substantial. Yes, no death tax, there was none, and when Palmer's wife, who was running in a seat, was asked by the media, where is your evidence that there is a death tax that Labor is bringing in? Her response was, well, where's your evidence that they're not bringing one in?
That's right. Yeah. That's right. It's the old teapot in the sky argument,
isn't it, Jake? You can't prove that there isn't a China teapot orbiting the sun right now.
Zadina Mohesin from England has said good evening from England.
Yes, good evening.
Yes, good evening from England. Good morning from Australia. Now, speaking of the Queensland election, Jake, you have Labor. Labor has clinched the government in election, expected to win the required 47 seats.
Yep. So for a majority government, which was a big thing in the lead up to the election. Well, actually, it's probably a big thing in the lead up to just about every election, because essentially, if you have a minority government, then you have to negotiate with the crossbench on particularly the independent and minor parties for people to essentially form a coalition with you in order to form government.
Who wants to do that?
Well, it's rarely palatable, because essentially it means that you can't do all the stuff that you promised you were going to do. It means that you have to do some of the stuff and negotiate with a bunch of other people in order to pass the other stuff that they want to do.
Look,
yes,
absolutely. Now, this was a broad and diverse set of voters across Queensland. The issues which were at play were significantly around COVID-19 and the border closures, and whether or not Anastasia Palaszczuk was going to appear to be strong-willed on the borders. Also at play, Jake, was the topic that we covered in significant detail, the one that we did actually research, which was the Townsville and Cairns curfews. Yes. And Liberal coming out and saying, look, that's what we're going to do. Deb Frecklington saying she's going to install a curfew that was going to put, I think it was 8, between 8 and 14, between
11 and 18.
Anyone under 14... anyone under 14 needed to be home by 8 o'clock. Anyone between 15 and 18 needed to be home before 10 o'clock. If they were out, they were going to get a $250 fine.
The parents were going to get a $250 fine.
Yeah, the parents were going to get a $250 fine, which is just, I suppose we can call it ludicrous now, Jake, because it's just a horrific punishment for families who are already struggling.
Well, it was interesting. One of the headline articles that came out, during the election, during the election counting. So during the
Yes.
counting that occurred last night was, quote, "Well, it's clear that Townsville doesn't care about crime."
Which is just bizarre.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look, people would care about doing it the right way, and a willy-nilly curfew, Jake, was never going to cut the proverbial mustard, as they say in Townsville.
Well, unless there's evidence to suggest that such a proposal would work, and unfortunately, it seems that there are other programs that are more successful, that are less punitive towards the parents as well, and re-engage youth. We actually spoke about another youth program, which was youth engagement on the Good News episode.
Exactly,
So,
and that's
anyway.
the problem, right? The experiment has been run. And the experiment has failed. So,
well, that specific experiment around curfews and punitive measures towards parents for their children being out after a certain amount of time. Exactly. And it also the one thing that I don't think we talked about as well is that it does preclude the premise that there are some kids who are unsafe at home, and that's an important thing to note. And they may not feel comfortable comfortable speaking to a police officer when they are picked up outside of the curfew. Anyway, they're all
yeah, you're right. That's such a good point, and not something that I'd thought about either. So that's a really good point. Now, Townsville had a swing of 2.7%. Interestingly enough, when you go on the ABC website to have a look at all the electorates, Townsville was listed as the most marginal Labor electorate. So if the voices could be heard anywhere, it was going to be there. And they had a swing of 2.7% towards Labor. So Labor's Scott Stewart is returning there. Cairns...
Sorry, go on. Yep.
No, you're right.
Look, there was... It's really interesting. I was just going to provide a little bit of context because the vote for One Nation was down just about right across Queensland. So they've returned, I think, two members. Yeah. But the primary and I think preference votes for One Nation were down significantly right across the state. And so when we're talking about the swing towards one party or another, you do need to take into account that it's not necessarily people from Labor voting for Liberal or people who would normally vote Liberal voting for Labor. It's potentially a swing away from One Nation to one of those major parties.
All right, that's a really interesting point. That's good to know as well, because my understanding is that Liberals were going to give their preferences to One Nation, and we're putting Greens.
It's all seat by
last?
seat. It's all seat by seat. One of the ones that we'll talk about is Jackie Trad, who lost her seat. And there was a decision made by the Liberal National Party in that specific seat of South Brisbane, where the LNP decided to preference the Greens, which seems a bit of an interesting choice for preference selection in that seat. And as a consequence, Jackie Trad, the former deputy premier, was kicked out in favour of a Greens member, Amy McMahon.
All right, well, let's get back to Jackie Trad in a second. I just want to touch on Cairns, which was the other town that had the other city, that had the curfew proposal, and that had a swing of 5.1% to the ALP. It wasn't listed as a marginal seat, but so Michael Healy from the ALP gets to keep that one. So Townsville and Cairns, who had one of the sort of issues outside of COVID-19, I guess you could say, interestingly enough, had a massive swing towards Labor.
Yeah, and I don't know. It's interesting. There'll be, I'm sure, a lot of analysis that we can probably talk about in coming weeks. But I do question the amount to which that curfew proposal or policy impacted the vote. I dare say that as a tourist town, Cairns and Townsville to a certain extent as well, with Magnetic Island, etc. For those two areas, for those two regions, I wonder whether it was people recognising that that proposal was a bit tokenistic, and thus, there wasn't too many proposals for that actual area from the LNP, or whether those tourist towns were just wanting to get, they were appreciative of the fact that, now that the lockdown has essentially ended for Queensland because of the strong leadership on COVID-19 and keeping our borders essentially shut. That largely the tourism industry is going to have that opportunity to open back up relatively soon. Yeah, it's an interesting one.
It is a very interesting one. And so just updated 8 minutes ago, apparently. So ALP have got 49 seats, predicted to win 52. They needed 47 to win. So
that is what you would refer to as a landslide.
Is it?
Yeah.
A red wave.
A red wave. Well, there's certainly a couple of green flecks, and I don't know what color.
There's some seaweed amongst the waves.
I don't know what color the Katter Australia Party. I think they're bright yellow, although that went for Palmer previously. But look, they've got two seats. The Katter Australia Party as well. Which was quite interesting. I think one or two independents as well.
Okay.
And a couple of One Nation seats as well. So it'll be a really interesting makeup. But quite an interesting outcome.
It was an interesting election. There were 93 seats, 12 political parties, and a record 597 candidates.
Yeah.
144 more candidates than in 2017. Everyone's getting into politics, Jake. Everyone's doing it. And one more side note, in a funny comment. Well, it didn't mean it to be funny, but I thought it was pretty funny. I've got here Anthony Chisholm in a spookily Halloween-related comment credited Anastasia Palaszczuk with bringing Labor back from the dead on Halloween. So Labor's the zombie vote is big.
The zombie vote is big. I would say that the vote from the living was probably bigger, and the vote from the living is potentially a comment on the management, the leadership that was shown around COVID-19.
Well, you would, Jake. You would think that the living vote. Your biases are showing. All right.
This is an interesting thing. I've always been a swing voter. I've always voted on the issues.
My electorate You're a lunatic.
It's
an Australian Jake.
I completely agree. I completely agree.